Thank you so much, Derek and Learn the Birds for hosting me. I haven't been back in a while, but I'm excited to share some stories and birds and ecology from Colombia. My name is Benny Jacobs-Schwartz, aka Birds by Beegis, and I'm based out of Los Angeles and Monteverde, Costa Rica, and I've been traveling in Latin America for about 20 years. And most of my birding efforts are focused in the New World tropics, where I run tours to places like Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador, Trinidad and Tobago, and constantly developing new itineraries to places like Brazil and Panama and things like that. And I'm a super passionate birder. I have a background in environmental education. I've been guiding tours of all different types for about 14 years. And then starting in 2024, I started running my own international birding tours. And I ran 4 last year, and we've got 7 on the calendar that are teed up to go this year. I just finished one in Costa Rica, and then heading back to Costa Rica later this month to lead another. And then, yeah, so that's kind of my passion project. I love getting people excited about the outdoors and helping provide safe and exciting ways to learn more about both our local environments in Los Angeles, as well as in the New World tropics. And I'll go ahead and share my screen because there's a little bit more prompts in here. My preferred styles, if any questions come up, feel free to throw them in the chat, and then we'll dive into them at the end. And then this presentation will be about 3 hours, so make sure you guys have already gone to the restroom. No, I'm just joking. It'll be about 50 minutes, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. Most of the media in here is mine, unless otherwise photo credits will be given. And in general, I like to start broad, kind of go over some kind of big picture topics, and then dive into some more specific case studies. So that will be the plan for this evening. So like I said, my name is Benny Jacobs-Schwartz, aka Birds by Beegis. And tonight, or today, or wherever time zone you're tapping in from, we'll be diving into Colombia, South America's birdiest country. So like I said, I run international tours. These 2 tours are already closed for registration, but there are 2 more tours that I'm actually actively pushing because we're just about to the registration deadline, which is in about 5 days. So I have an Amazon tour that leads right into a Northwest Andes Ecuador tour. And in the Amazon, we generally see between 250 to 290 species of birds in about 6 days. We get to visit incredible clay lakes here where macaws and other species of parrots and sometimes monkeys will come down, and on a rare occasion, a big cat. And things like agami herons are big targets. Fun group riding around on our boat on the Rio Napo, and then a rare clear night sky in the Amazon on Rio Napo. And everybody always asks if there's Huatzin. There are quite a few. And then that tour leads right into my Northwest Ecuador tour. It's 10 days, traversing a wide variety of ecosystems. This is a quick plug for Ecuador, and it's very similar to Colombia in the sense that it's in the Andes in South America, but features a wide variety of birds and incredible diversity. In March last year, we saw about 506 species in about 10 days, and then in July of last year, we saw about 486 species. So with the 2 trips combined, if people run them back to back, I think we clocked like 672 species in about 16 days. So pretty exhilarating birding and a lot of excellent photography opportunities. So registration for these tours close in 5 days, and I'm offering a $350 discount for folks that sign up for both. Both these tours are 100% going. So just wanted to make sure folks know there's a couple spots left. That being said, for a little bit of context, here's Colombia and here's Ecuador. Ecuador is about the size of Colorado and home to a great variety of birds. So I just wanted to put Colombia in context because that's what we're going to be talking about next. So Colombia is fantastically birdie, and as the title of this presentation suggests, it's the most birdie country in the world. And what that means is that, yes, there's a lot of birds in terms of abundance, but in terms of biodiversity, Colombia holds the crown for highest number of bird species. So Ecuador is, 1,600, 1,700, depending on kind of lists and splits, and Colombia is just over 2,000. So it makes it #1 in the world, which is pretty incredible. And let's get into Colombia from a glance. So this is an area of the country about 2 hours from Medellin, a place called Guatapé. It's a very touristic area, but it's extremely beautiful. And Colombia makes up about 1% of the Earth's surface, but it's actually home to an astonishing 10 to 14% of global biodiversity. And like I said, it's #1 in birds with about 2,000. Colombia hosts about 70 different endemic species. It's also #1 in orchid species with over 4,200 species. It's #2 in fish and amphibians. One of the most fundamental pieces to understanding diversity in a region is, I think, kind of starting at the ground level and understanding the geology, because the geology determines the vegetative communities. It's going to determine, how the weather patterns are distributed in terms of precipitation throughout the country. And it's also going to determine things like isolation and over time how species evolve, or species become distinct, or communities become distinct and eventually speciate. So as you can see here, Colombia has quite a diverse geography and geology, and we're going to dive into it. And when I was first putting together this presentation, I was like, wow, how do I cover such a expansive topic in a way that allows the audience to stay engaged and for the message to hit home? So I spent a lot of time like trying to type it up and get some slides together. And I was like, wait, let me see if I can find something that's actually really effective and that's not going to be boring. So we'll watch this for a few minutes. It's about 3 minutes, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
The geography of Colombia explained in under 3 minutes. Generally, Colombia's geography can be separated into 5 very distinct regions, which together make up one of the most geographically diverse countries in the world. Going from east to west, the first region we encounter is the Colombian part of the Amazon rainforest. This area makes up around 10% of the total Amazon and is home for an extremely diverse ecosystem. The tens of thousands of species like reptiles, insects, birds, and mammals, many of them endemic to Colombia, inhabit this area and make Colombia rank among the 17 so-called mega-diverse countries in the world. Just north of the Amazon rainforest lies the savanna and tropical grassland region called Llanos, which is Spanish for the plains. This vast space is characterized by some of the largest oil fields in the world and endless cattle farms, which have been the backbone of the region for hundreds of years, ever since the Spanish arrived in the 16th century. The rainforest and savanna regions gradually increase in elevation until the northernmost stretch of the Andean mountains cuts them off. Covering around 1/5 of Colombia, Cordillera Oriental, Cordillera Central, and Cordillera Occidental are 3 parallel mountain ranges which split the Andes upon crossing the border to Colombia. The highest peaks can be found in the Central Range, which reaches heights of 5,750 meters above the sea level. This isn't even the tallest mountain of Colombia, yet it's higher than the tallest mountain in entire Europe. It is in between these mountain ranges where the largest Colombian cities of Bogota, Medellin, and Cali are located. The Rio Cauca and Rio Magdalena are flowing between these mountain ranges, bringing the meltwater from the permanently snow-covered mountain peaks to the 4th region, the Caribbean coast. The Colombian coast at the Caribbean Sea extends for 800 kilometers and is scattered with busy seaports, which connect the Llanos with the rest of the world. Between the seaports, there are a series of beach vacation destinations with palm trees and dreamy beaches. The north, however, is characterized by an isolated mountain range called Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, which has the highest peak of Colombia. Due to its isolation, the view from this peak to the Paraminaba Sea allows for the longest uninterrupted view between 2 points on planet Earth. The 5th and final region of Colombia is yet again completely different. The Pacific lowlands, west of the Andes, are the least developed region, covered in hostile swamps, little exploited mineral resources, and jungles. The almost 45,000 square kilometer large region only houses 3% of the Colombian population, and a mere 130 kilometers of highway have been developed here. As a comparison, the Los Angeles County alone has over 800 kilometers of highway connecting it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and leave a like if you want to see more like it. Cheers.
All right. Well, despite the absolute butchering of the pronunciation of those locations, I would say that's a pretty good summary. and we're going to circle back to some of these areas in a little bit, but this is, so basically our talk tonight is going to visit two areas. We have a route from the central and western Andes, and then a route in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta into the lowland Caribbean. So we're going to explore these two regions. Okay, cool. Yeah, so like I was saying, we're going to focus on two routes in a moment, but basically starting from the central Andes here, working our way from the central and western Andes, and then spending some time in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, into the lowland Caribbean over here. So in terms of diversity, I think it's important to understand, like, why is Colombia so diverse? So first and foremost, just like any equatorial region that has stable temperatures, that's, tropical overall, we're going to see a lot of birds and other taxa represented, like incredible diversity. And we saw those stats earlier, right? Number one, with orchids, birds, number two for fish and frogs. It's just a smorgasbord of biodiversity. And so some of those drivers, like I said, include not really marked seasonality, right? We have, in Central America, we have kind of a rainy season and a dry season, and there's definitely times of the year where there's more and less precipitation. But overall, the temperature threshold is pretty consistent. It has a narrow range as opposed to places farther north and farther south where there's pretty dramatic temperature shifts and large scale migrations. And in 2019, there were 58,000 different species of all taxes registered in Colombia, and again, between 70 and 80 endemic species. And Colombia is the second most biodiverse country in terms of genetic biodiversity, specific biodiversity, and ecosystemic diversity, like across the board. And circling back to these kind of 5 regions. So like I said, today we're going to be exploring in depth the Andean region and the Costa Norte, or like the Caribbean. And so here's the Amazon, which is about 40% of the country. This is like the Orinocan Plains or Los Llanos. And then this is the Andean region. This is the Pacific Lowlands or the Chocó. And then this is the Caribbean North. And so each of these ecoregions kind of has their own distinct seasonality, right? The Amazon, what most people would imagine, the plains, very dry, like different kind of rolling savanna type habitat. This is very wet, very undeveloped, very incredibly rainy, lowland tropical rainforest. And then we have a mix of ecosystems here, from Paramo to cloud forest to I forget what the other ecotone is called, but at any rate, we're going to dive into that. So when most people think about Colombia's history, I think they think about probably Pablo Escobar, or they think about armed militia groups or paramilitaries. And rightfully so, Colombia has had quite a violent past. But one of the most incredible things about Colombia is its history of transformation. And Colombia is incredibly safe across the board. Just like in any place in any country, there are certain places that you probably wouldn't want to go. But as far as like tourism and birding and major cities, like Colombia is incredibly safe. And one of the most beautiful cities in Colombia, and by many Colombians, they say that Medellin is the best city in Colombia. And this is what it looks like. Generally speaking, Medellin is built in an inter-Andean valley, which is kind of like this flat space where, as you can see, the valley floor is present, and then it slopes up into the foothills of the Andes, and then even higher up. And so one of the ways that Colombia has prioritized development and kind of retransforming its image and its accessibility and its services for the people of Medellin to have different livelihoods that aren't involved in illicit activities. One is creating connectivity so people can move around the city easily and effectively and safely. So this is the only city in Colombia that has a metro system like that. And in most developed nations, the kind of a metro is, I guess, maybe an expectation. But in Colombia, that's has not been the case. And so this metro is extremely safe and affordable, and it connects a large swath of the city to the rest of the city. And there's another really fantastic thing. These gondola or cable cars basically stretch across the valley floor up into the highlands, up into the upper reaches of the foothills of Medellin, which connects the 4.1 million people that call Medellin home from the upper areas where often the most economically deprived and socioeconomically vulnerable people are living, often in homes that are unpermitted and not particularly safe. And so people get pushed to these upper reaches. Now, in the past, before these cable cars and before the metro, it was quite a task to move yourself from these upper areas down to the valley floor or to other places kind of throughout the city where you might be getting work. So now with the cable cars, people can basically walk to the cable car station, take a very inexpensive cable car ride down to wherever their stop is. They can get in a colectivo, which is like a small kind of shuttle van, or they can get on a bus, or they can get in the metro. And so the city has like become way more connected and way more accessible. And it's also really cool to ride in the cable cars, to get the perspective of the city. Very, very unique and extremely cool. And so Medellin is kind of modeling what's possible for the country and for the region. And it's not just my biased opinion about Colombia being incredibly cool. Colombia has won a lot of awards from South America, within South America. You can review this later at your own leisure, but you can see that Colombia is leading the way in a lot of categories. So continuing our conversation about transformation, one of the most important things that I think as consumers and tourists that we can do to support Colombia's transformation is engaging in nature tourism, right? In avid tourism, bird tourism. And there's been investments in partnerships with organizations like USAID and others to create pamphlets and manuals and like this whole incredibly comprehensive PDF resource for local guides within the country, because these local guides, these Colombian local guides, serve as a bridge between tourists and rural campesinos, people that live in the countryside, because a lot of these campesinos are the ones that are starting and engineering these grassroots avatourism projects, because they're starting to see the incredible benefits of avatourism as a sustainable modality to supplement their income, because maybe they're doing some cattle farming, or maybe they're doing some vegetable farming, whatever they're doing. Those are obviously very challenging, very volatile trades and professions. And so to have something that can offset and supplement their revenue while still allowing them to conserve the forest, protect the local ecosystems, protect the local watersheds, they're being rewarded financially by doing this. Okay, a forest is worth, a tree is worth 10 times more standing than it is cut. But folks in these rural communities often don't have the luxury of thinking into the future. They're thinking, maybe on a very short-term scale, because they need to address their basic necessities, food, water, shelter, etc. So these opportunities to prioritize saving their land, keeping the trees, keeping the watershed intact and healthy is being supported by ecotourism, people coming to their places. And so these folks don't necessarily have a background to start in ecotourism or avatourism, but these local guides do. They're trained, they're professional, many of them are bilingual, and they serve this bridge between folks who are from out of the country visiting to learn about the birds and the ecosystems, and the people whose projects we're visiting. So it's really cool and helps continue to support the country moving out of, illicit activities and into sustainable and forward-thinking projects. So circling back to what makes Colombia so absolutely fantastically birdie is the geology. And in Ecuador, we actually just have one contiguous range of the Andes, right? The Andes Mountains go all the way from Tierra del Fuego all the way into Venezuela, and there's some underlying geology out into like Trinidad and Tobago. Now, in Ecuador, the Andes are basically, like I said, one cordillera or one contiguous range. But when they get into Colombia, they actually split into three separate ridges or mountain ranges, like sub-mountain ranges, and they're called cordilleras or ridges. And so you can see here, each of the cordilleras is roughly the same length, about 1,200, between 1,000 and 1,200 kilometers. And in between the central and eastern Andes is the Rio Magdalena, or like the lifeblood of Colombia. And it flows north. So it empties out into the Caribbean Sea by the port of Barranquilla, and it flows about 950 miles. And the Magdalena River takes its name from Mary Magdalene. And its drainage surface covers about 24% of the country's surface area, and it passes through where about 66% of the country's population is found. So it has an incredibly important history and role, and the relationship between the people of Colombia and the Rio Magdalena is inextricably linked. So now we've gotten a little bit of an overview of some of kind of the lay of the land in Colombia, and we're going to dive into our first route, which is the Western and Central Andes route. Now, all of my tours are basically designed to serve as complements. So, if you go to the northern region in Costa Rica with me, we're going to focus on northern region specialties and range restricted species. And then if you go to the south, there will be some species that overlap, but the real focus is on having complements so that one can continue to explore Latin America and know that no matter where they go, we're going to be focusing on unique and endemic species so that you can enjoy seeing lots of new birds. And obviously, there's always going to be some overlap. So the same is true here in our Western and Central Andes route. And like I said, each of these cordilleras are unique and distinct. And there's actually some birds who only are found on literally the tops of mountains. There's like some parrots there's a couple of species of parrots, for example, that are only found on one mountaintop in the Eastern Andes. That's like their entire population, incredibly rare. So there's all these incredible, unique gems scattered throughout Colombia. And that's why on all my tours, I partner with incredible top-notch local guides who know the local providers at their local projects and have traveled the country over to make sure that we're going to the right places and visiting, the right routes to get awesome birds and, of course, staying safe. So all these points here are basically the places that will bird. And you can see here, this is the Western and here is the Central Andes. So kicking things off, day one, basically, we'll visit a location called La Florida, Bosque de las Aves. And this is at around 2,000 meters up in cloud forest. And so at this hotspot, there's about 364 species reported. And some of the highlight birds here are things like golden tanager, which are quite common. But the big target here is the multicolored tanager. This is a stunning endemic tanager, only found in Colombia. Scaled antpitta comes to the feeders, which is incredible. And greenish puffleg is another example, blue-naped chlorofonia. Now, on these tours, they have been in Colombia and Ecuador, they have really been advancing the levels of like bird feeding and bird watching opportunities and photography. In the past, there's a group of birds here called antpittas. And for anybody who's traveled mostly in South America, where the majority of antpittas are found, back in the day, they were extremely difficult to find, but due to the advent and ingenuity and innovation in bird feeding techniques, largely thanks to the innovation of Angel Paz, who's outside of Mindo, Ecuador, whose farm we visit on my Ecuador tour. They've developed ways to attract antpittas to come to these perches where they put out live worms from them, and then the birds come in at a certain time, and it's just a riot. And so between antpitta feeding stations, hummingbird feeders, fruit feeders, and then walking the trails and things like that, you can see and detect an incredible diversity of birds. And another bird that we'll look for here is the golden-headed quetzal. This is a cousin to the ever-famous resplendent quetzal out of Central America. And one thing I decided to do on this presentation is to include a screenshot of the eBird range map, as well as a kind of an overall estimation of let me try that again, including the number of observations that species has on eBird. So as you can see, there's about 30,000 for golden-headed quetzal, and their range extends from Bolivia all the way up to Venezuela. Another target at our next hotspot at Doña Dora, which is a famous bird feeding station. And if you join me, you can learn all about the history of Doña Dora, which means like the female owner of the property. Her name is Dora and her family. And we're at a little bit lower elevation, but this is our second stop on day one. We're still in cloud forest, still at about 360 species, and highlight birds include this toucan barbet, as well as the Andean motmot. And as you can see, with 58,000, this bird is even more abundant. And another target, which this was actually photographed on the second story of their kind of bird feeding home situation. It's just really cool. It's a restaurant, and they have like bird feeders in the back, incredible food, and like 2 levels of bird feeders, like I said, with fruit and like this big fig tree on top and hummingbird feeder. So it's quite the riot. And this bird is much more scarce, and this is basically like restricted to Panama, Colombia, and a little bit of northwest Ecuador. And this is the gray and gold tanager. And again, these are just some of the highlights. There's thousands of birds in Colombia, and each of these hotspots are pushing 300 plus. Here in the Choco lowlands is on the west coast, and this is the area that we talked about in that video that's the least developed and only has like 30 kilometers of roads, and it's extremely humid but beautiful, unique set of species. And we're down in the lowlands. This is 50 meters, and the location is San Cipriano Natural Reserve, and there's about 400 species recorded here. And this is Choco lowland rainforest. Excuse me. And some of the highlight birds include this stunning scarlet and white tanager, which is quite rare with only 2,500 observations globally. And the Sapayoha, which is even more rare, there's only 950 observations globally. And this is a Choco endemic. This is the Choco bioregion, which is from Panama into Western Colombia and Northwest Ecuador. This is its own unique region with about 30 endemic species only found in the Choco bioregion. And so we visit, like I said, as many different ecosystems as possible in this tour to experience them as well to see as many different birds as possible. Another gorgeous bird that's found in the Choco lowlands is the 5-colored barbet, and this bird is also incredibly rare with about 740 species, and it's listed as near threatened. Another very rare bird is the Burleps tinamou, 700 species or 700 obs total. So as you can see, the Choco lowlands are just like really cool, and there's some incredibly rare birds and some fun birds to go look for and observe that most people in the world have never seen, right? This black-tipped cotinga, one of 3 in its genus, with about 1,500 observations globally. And although relatively common, this is a stunning bird that we'll look for also here. This is the slaty-capped shrike vireo, and there's about 11,000 observations globally. The next spot we visit is San Felipe Birding Lodge. And so although there are trails here, our focus will be visiting the feeders here in the morning time. And there's about 300 species, and we're back in the cloud forest. And some of the birds we'll look for here include the Colombian chachalatka with about 53,000 observations, but this is a near endemic in Colombia. I think there's just a few reports from northern Ecuador, but it's basically a Colombian endemic. And chestnut wood quail is also a bird that reliably is coming to feeders here as well. And again, there's about 10,000 observations, so this bird's kind of medium common. Here's the bar-crested ant shrike. This is a true Colombian endemic. It's relatively widespread in the Andes, with about 47,000 observations, and very similar to the barred and fasciated ant shrikes. And then we'll make our way to Laguna de Sonso, continuing on day 3 of 12. This is Laguna de Sonso Natural Reserve, and we're at a lower elevation here at about 936 meters, and about 415 species are recorded here. And the ecosystem type here is both floodplain and tropical dry forest. You can see the floodplain and lagoons here, and then this is all tropical dry forest, which is seasonal, and one of the most threatened ecosystems actually in the world. And some of the birds we'll look for here include this endemic grayish piculet, as well as the stunning dwarf cuckoo. And this is an apical flycatcher. And for folks from North America, this is in the Myarchus genus, or folks who birded out here. This is an endemic flycatcher with about 7,500 observations total. One of the most enigmatic birds we'll look for in this region are the horned screamers, and depending on what the water's doing and how the rains have been, we stand a good chance to see these really cool birds, horned screamers. So moving on to day 4, we're gonna head upslope, continuing back into cloud forest. As you can see, we spent a lot of time in cloud forest, and rightfully so. There's a very high diversity of species here, and this is the Sanctuary Flora y Fauna, the Otun, or the Otun Plants and Animal Sanctuary. And some of the birds we're going to look for here include the white-throated daggerbill, and there's about 540 species reported here. And this is cloud forest, but this is the central Andean cloud forest. So there's different species that we're going to be looking for here, including the cauca guan, which is an endemic. and there's only 3,700 observations, and it's listed as vulnerable. Now, metallic green tanager is one of dozens and dozens of species of tanagers that can be found in Colombia. This is just one example of, like I said, many. And there's about 20,000 observations globally within its range of Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. Now, this is a real showstopper. This is the barrel-spangled tanager, and this is a bird that actually doesn't really come down to feeders. In recent years, there's maybe one or two feeders that this bird is starting to come down to within Ecuador or Colombia, but this is a really stunning neotropical tanager. This is the barrel-spangled tanager. Now, on to day 5, we're going to be heading up to one of the birdiest regions on our tour, Tatama National Park, via Montezuma Road. So Montezuma Road basically stretches from lower elevation up towards higher elevation all the way into like the subparamo. And here, like I said, it's so birdy. There's about 626 species recorded in this little hotspot. And it's basically a couple different ecosystems. Like I said, it's like paramo or subparamo with subtropical rainforest, Andean tropical rainforest, and there's a couple really important highlight birds here that are both endemic and very range restricted, and they're in a genus of tanagers called Banksia. And there's, I think, 4 or 5 of them, but we will get into that in a moment. But this is the gold ring tanager, one of 2 that we expect to see here or hope to see here. This is the gold ring tanager. And one of the incredible things that's happening at Montezuma Rainforest Lodge, where we stay for our tours, is there are women leading the way for conservation and avatourism. And as I'm sure you've seen in many places, birding tour guides are predominantly male, for no good reason, honestly. And one of the ways that they're setting trends is by having female guides, and this is the Tapasco family, and they were recently featured in ABA magazine, which is like the American Birding Association, on the cover back in April 2023. And the women of Montezuma's Rainforest Reserve and Eco Lodge, and it's just absolutely incredible. And we work with their family to take us out, and they're just incredible birders, and they know their area super well. Yesenia is usually who works with our tour groups when we're staying at their lodge. So if you're interested to learn more about their family and their conservation endeavors and their history, you can check out the article. And here's their wonderful family, and this is the matriarch here. And so in addition to the gold ring tanager, the black and gold tanager is another one of those Banksia endemics. Both of these birds do not come down to feeders. They do not respond to playback. They are endemic, and they are absolutely sensational. And like I said, they're very range restricted, and this bird actually is less rare than the Sapoyoa, and it has 4,400 observations. Other endemics that we're going to be looking for here include the crested ant tanager, with about 6,000 observations in Colombia. And not an endemic, but a very stunning bird is the chestnut-breasted Chloriphonia. And this bird has about 5,000 observations throughout its range. So we spent the whole day basically birding from the top of the mountain to the bottom. We start early in the morning all the way at the top, and then we have breakfast up there. Lunch gets delivered, and we bird our way through the elevational gradients looking for endemic and range-restricted species. And then we finish at the lodge, have dinner, and then maybe do a little bit of owling. The next day, we'll go again. We'll look for some things that we missed, mostly birding around in the lower elevations of Montezuma Rainforest Lodge. And then after our time there, Montezuma Rainforest Lodge is within Tatama National Park. And from there, we're going to head to a very famous area in Colombia called Manizales. And we'll be looking for incredible birds like this cloud forest pygmy owl and other epic birds like the ornate hawk eagle. And here is a video. These are both Digiscope videos from tours that I've led. And this is the cloud forest pygmy owl. And before we leave, like I said, we'll spend time at the lodge and visiting and checking out the hummingbird feeders, which are quite productive, yielding stunners like this violet-tailed sylph, green thorntail, rufous-gaped hill star, empress brilliant. Now, Colombia, I think, is like #1 for hummingbird diversity in the world. I think Colombia is home to about 167 species of hummingbirds, and Ecuador is not far behind with about 133 or 134. So basically, like I said, day 6, we bird half day at Tatama National Park, and then we make our way to Manizales, and we have some time on the road, and then we'll overnight in Manizales, and then we'll kick things off early in the morning at Rio Blanco Ecological Reserve. I was actually just here in November, targeting some very rare birds, which we were able to get, which was super exciting. But this place is very famous for some of the antpitta feeding stations here and also the rare birds that can be found within the trails and the cloud forest. And we're still in the Central Andes. And I think there's about 5 or 6 different antpittas that kind of have their own schedule here. One of which is the chestnut-crowned antpitta. It's relatively abundant within its range with about 47,000 observations. Bicolored antpitta. This is a near endemic. It's only found in northern Ecuador and Colombia, and this is much scarcer with about 3,500 observations globally. Another antpitta, this is the slate-crowned antpitta. As you can see, it has a slightly larger range, and it has about 4,900 eBird observations. Within the area, this is a species we'll be looking for called the golden plumed parakeet. And it's not particularly abundant despite having kind of a large-ish range, but this is a bird with about 6,500 eBird observations, and they are just stunning and charismatic and really playful and beautiful. And another bird that, when most people think of the name tapaculo, and if you spent time birding in Latin America, they're generally very furtive, generally very dark gray or black, and hard to get a look at, but you hear them calling a lot. It's kind of this rolling trill. But the ocellated tapaculo is kind of it breaks the mold in terms of tapaculos. And there are some places where this bird actually comes out into the open at feeders. And it has about 7,900 observations globally. And Ecuador and Colombia are basically the best places to see this incredible bird. And this is the masked saltator. I spent 2 days with my partner back in November looking for this bird, and it is incredibly rare. This is a typo. It only has about 1,600 observations globally, and it's just very, very cool. Alrighty, so that wraps up day 7. A lot of birds not mentioned here. You'll have to come and see them in person. But we'll kick things off at Hacienda del Bosque. We are still in the Manizales area. Hacienda del Bosque is a really fantastic birding location that was originally just cattle farming, but oftentimes the cattle farming is happening in areas with really important forest and important ecosystems. And as I'm sure most people are familiar with cattle farming, they are not generally great for the ecology. An ecosystem can be destroyed over a short period of time with intensive grazing by cattle. And so, which is generally how it's done here. It's kind of grazed to the ground. But one of the initiatives at Hacienda del Bosque has been to conserve certain patches of forest to make sure that there's both, areas for grazing for cows as well as intact forest, which is incredibly important and awesome. And so they've created a fantastic experience for birders here. They have lodging on site, but the things that we're really here for are the unique and charismatic birds here. And so, like I said, this is a mix of pasture land, high Andean cloud forest, and paramo. And paramo, I'll dive into that in a little bit, but it's basically tropical alpine. So one of the stars of the show is the gray-breasted mountain toucan, and maybe one of my all-time favorite birds. And mountain toucans are a unique type of toucans that are found at higher elevation, and they tend to be quite colorful. And here's another look at the gray-breasted mountain toucan. So Hacienda del Bosque has kind of a bird feeding route where they have a bunch of different unique and charismatic birds, including barred fruit eater, slaty brushfinch, and yellow-crowned tyrant, there's a bunch of birds that are coming to these feeders, but the real stars of the show are the mountain toucans, including gray-breasted mountain toucans, which have about 7,200 observations globally. And the really interesting thing about these birds is that unlike most toucans like keel-billed or yellow-throated or these arasaris in Central America and stuff that come down to feeders readily, these mountain toucans were not coming down to feeders at all. And it actually was one of the team members at Hacienda del Bosque who decided to try grapes. After trying all these different fruits to get these toucans to come down to the feeders, it was actually grapes that sealed the deal. And so now when you go to Hacienda del Bosque, when we go there, whether you're a photographer or not, as you can see, this is, right here on these incredible perches with dreamy backgrounds, just super fun, even with a phone or if you have, a camera, great photography opportunities. And also on a good day, black-billed mountain toucans will also come down to the feeders. So you can sometimes get both species of mountain toucans on the feeders here, if we haven't already seen them in the forest. Again, 9,000 observations globally, and this is a bird that's really only found in Northwest South America. But the real star of the show, and the one that took us 3 times to finally see, I went there in 2023 to Hacienda del Bosque, did not get to see the crescent-faced antpitta. We went back the first day in November with Peter Kaesner. He was there. He was with his wife, and for folks who don't know, Peter Kaesner recently hit 10,000 bird species observed, and we actually ran into Peter back in 2023, the first time we went, and he just happened to be at Hacienda del Bosque that morning, and he was taking his wife to see the crescent-faced antpitta, and she did not show. Her name is Lunita because she has this little crescent moon on her face. And so we went back a 3rd time, and finally we got to see the crescent-faced antpitta, which was a big lifer and a huge target for my girlfriend. And as you can see, this bird is quite scarce. There's only 1,300 observations globally, and this might just be the most beautiful antpitta of them all. I've got to upload some of my photos because at the time I hadn't seen this bird. But there are many more birds to see here, including the enigmatic and stunning sword-billed hummingbird, with about 16,000 total observations globally. This is the only bird in the world whose beak is so long that it precludes it from preening itself, and so it's evolved to scratch itself to remove ectoparasites and maintain its feather quality. So that's just, again, these are all just the highlights, right? There's so much more that's happening. And then day 8, we've gone upslope a substantial amount, and we'll be based out of an incredible kind of Swiss chalet feeling lodge called Termales del Ruiz at about 3,500 meters. And this is Paramo, right? We are talking about this tropical alpine ecosystem, right? And so within this ecosystem, there are unique species that are not found in other types of ecosystems, and some that are actually not even found in any other areas than here. Like I talked about with the parrots, there are some hummingbirds that also are incredibly range restricted. And some of the ones that we'll be talking about that have a medium range is this rainbow-bearded thornbill. This is a high elevation hummer. It's still relatively scarce. There's about 4,700 observations globally, but this is a high elevation hummingbird. It's only found in the upper reaches of the Andes. And as the same story is true for the purple-backed thornbill, 5,400 observations globally. It is very hard to get a bird at eye level. I mean, these birds are a couple inches. They're tiny, tiny, tiny. And you can see they've got a very short beak, which indicates the type of flowers that they feed on. And so when we're looking for them, we're looking for those types of flowers, and we generally get to see them with luck. A super abundant bird at the feeders and sugar feeders up in the high Andes is the masked flower piercer. But their abundance does not take away from their beauty. And as we get into the high elevation up here, we start getting into mountain tanager territory. There's several different species of mountain tanagers. And so we spent the whole day birding, and then we're going to continue our approach up to 4,800 meters to Los Nevados National Park, where we are looking for other birds. And again, the diversity has gone down, but the uniqueness continues to stay high. And one of our big targets here is the buffy helmet crest. Now, this bird has an incredibly restricted range. It's basically only found in Los Nevados National Park and like in a couple areas. It's very, very, very unique, very range restricted. And we have a couple other different helmet crests. There's a blue-bearded helmet crest of the Santa Marta region, which is like a 2-day trek to get up into the habitat to find it. These are endemics, right? These are all Colombian endemics. We have green-bearded helmet crest, buffy helmet crest, etc. So they're just stunning. And so at this point, I've seen the buffy and the green-bearded helmet crest, and I hope to see more. So this is a big target for us. This is the male. Another high elevation species is the red-crested cotinga. This bird's relatively abundant and widespread in its range in the high Andes with about 16,000. And then on day 11, we drop back down to about 2,800 meters. And at this hotspot called Mirador El Roble, there's about 300 species reported here and some very unique antpittas like the Chami antpitta that only has 1,600 observations globally. And it is a Colombian endemic and has a pretty patchy distribution at the right elevation. And this is the yellow-eared parrot. This is an endemic species that has an incredible story and ecology, which we'll talk a lot about on tour. But one of the things that I want to speak on today is that the yellow-eared parrot and its plight, see as it's listed as vulnerable, was one of the reasons why an organization called Pro Aves was started. But we'll talk about that in a second. So continuing at Mirador El Roble, like I said, we'll be looking for those parrots, as well as another endemic called the red-bellied grackle. It's relatively abundant within Colombia with about 9,500 observations, but again, very stunning endemic. And then we will visit the cock of the rock lek. So it's a silly name, but this is a type of bird called a cock of the rock. It's a cotinga. And we're back in the cloud forest. And at this hotspot, there's about 400 species observed. And here it is. This is the Andean cock of the rock, or gallo de la peña in Spanish. And these birds display in something called a lek. And a lek is basically where males congregate to display, whether it's dancing, calling, wing flaps, singing, noises, grunts, all types of things like that are basically on the table at these leks. And on both my Colombia and my Ecuador tours, we get to visit these Andean cock of the rock, Andean cock of the rock leks, where we get to observe these males. However, hands down, the most incredible lek I've ever visited is the one on my Colombia tour, and it's just spectacular. These birds, 10 to 12 males are displaying anywhere from 8 to 10 to 12 feet away from you, and just it's spectacular. Even with the phone or just your eyes, there's no way you can miss these things, and they're just really freaking awesome. And here's their range. They're relatively abundant. These birds lek in cloud forest systems near riparian areas, so near aquatic areas, but not right in the water, slightly up from it. So when they find these areas, oftentimes they'll establish these hides where folks can hang out and enjoy them. But at this lek in particular, there's no hide necessary. The birds are bold and brazen and just absolutely stunning. And if you can see here, their beak is hidden underneath their head plume of feathers. So we're getting close to wrapping up our Western and Central Andes section. And so on our last day, we'll visit the Jardín area and tropical dry forest, looking for some exceptionally rare and range-restricted endemics, including the Antioquia wren, which has only 760 observations globally. And if you shoot for the moon, you can still land among the stars, including stunners like this crimson-backed tanager and vermilion flycatcher. So let's see how we're doing on time. Pretty good. Alrighty, so on the next section of our tour will be, like I said, so I run these tours in sequence so that you can, if you're flying from somewhere far away, you want to make use of your time. 12 days seems like short to fly from however where you're coming from. You can connect it up. So there's all of these different cities like Bogota, Medellin, Cartagena, Barranquilla, Riohacha, Valledupar. Some have international airports and some have domestic airports. So when this tour wraps up, basically, depending on what the order is, you can basically start in, like we all meet in Cali, and then we do our tour, and then we finish in Medellin. And when we finish in Medellin, we fly that day into Barranquilla, and then we do our whole tour, and then we finish in Riohacha, and then you can fly from Riohacha back to Barranquilla, and then Barranquilla to wherever you're going, etc. So it's very easy to travel within Colombia now. And so we're going to go through the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. So like I talked about in our geology video, the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is this mountain here. It's this little mountain range, and it's extremely unique. It's actually older than the Andes, and it's geologically distinct. And it has the award for the highest peak closest to the ocean, which means that the elevation gain over like 2 kilometers is the most dramatic of, I think, anywhere in the world. The highest peak right next to the ocean. And so, again, the geology is interesting in that it sets the foundation for unique birds. And so the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta is home to indigenous groups like the Kogi and the Arawak and another group of indigenous folks from Colombia. And it's just this like sacred, beautiful area. And there's exceptionally unique birds. And this is the endemic hotspot for South America. This is the highest density of endemic birds anywhere in South America. And so here's a zoomed in look. This is like the highest peak, and here's the Caribbean Sea. And so basically day one, we arrive in Barranquilla, and then we're whisked up to the cloud forest of El Dorado Lodge at 1900 meters. This is a legitimate photo. This is not AI. This is Colombia. And these are our lodging facilities at the El Dorado Lodge. And it's just absolutely breathtaking. And so day one, basically we arrive and we'll have a little bit of time at the feeders, hang out, have a delicious dinner, hang out, go over the plan for tomorrow, and then rise early in the morning, and we'll go up by 4x4 vehicle, because the only way to access these roads is by 4x4 vehicle up to La Cochilla de San Lorenzo, or San Lorenzo Ridge, and Pro Aves Road. And so like I alluded to previously, Pro Aves is an incredible organization that was founded by young biologists, researchers, in an attempt to save the yellow-eared parrot, which is an endemic Colombian parrot. And their organization has been around for right around 25 years, and they have kind of a three-pronged approach: conservation, research, and environmental education. And so back in 1998, these conservationists were fired up to save the yellow-eared parrot from extinction. We'll talk a bit more about it, or if folks have questions, we can talk about it at the end. But that being said, Pro Aves now is the largest private reserve system in the country, and it's designed to protect the endangered species. And it basically is now protecting about 68% of all threatened species in Colombia. So it's just incredible work that they've been doing. And all of these little green pins are locations where Pro Aves has a reserve. And in some cases, they have a reserve and a lodge, which supports sustainable ecotourism. And El Dorado Lodge, like I said, is part of one of the Pro Aves reserves. As you can see, here's the pin for it. So up in the Santa Marta, or the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, a lot of endemic birds either have the name Sierra Nevada or Santa Marta. So if you see that, you can bet your bottom that there are endemic species, and only found in that mountain at a certain elevation. So they're just exceptionally cool. And we spend a couple days up here kind of going up and down the elevational gradients, looking for all the endemics plus whatever else we find. So Santa Marta brushfinch is one, hermit wood wren is another, black-cheeked mountain tanager, another endemic, Santa Marta parakeet, another endemic, yellow-crowned redstart, another endemic, scarlet-fronted parakeets, not an endemic, Santa Marta bush tyrant, a very rare endemic, also found up at the La Cochilla de San Lorenzo, this upper stretch, this what we call like a knife blade ridge at the top of the mountain. Here's a black-cheeked mountain tanager. This is one of the endemic mountain tanagers found here. Here's a female white-tailed star frontlet visiting a bromeliad bloom. And then here's her handsome partner. This is the male white-tailed star frontlet, also endemic. Blue-naped Chlorofonia, not endemic, but stunning and quite abundant up here in the Sierra Nevada. The Santa Marta blossom crown. This is an endemic blossom crown. There's actually only two blossom crowns in the world. Both are endemic to Colombia. There is the Tolima blossom crown and this Santa Marta blossom crown. Again, another endemic Santa Marta brush finch. Here's a white lord warbler, another endemic. Streak-capped spinetail, another endemic. Groove-billed toucanet, very similar to southern emerald toucanet or crimson rim toucanet, but this is the endemic groove-billed toucanet only found in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. This is an endemic subspecies of the bay-headed tanager. This is a black-headed tanager. I forget if this one's endemic or not, but still gorgeous. Not endemic, this is the swallow tanager, but during the right time of year, they can be extremely abundant and quite photogenic. So, like I said, those were kind of our targets. And then on day 3, we'll bird around a little bit, that elevation, and then we'll make our way down lower elevation, still in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, but down to, and we're going to be birding the road that connects the lower elevations up to the upper, called Minca Road. And instead of being up in like upper cloud forest and Paramo, we're going to be in cloud forest and into tropical rainforest. And we'll be looking for a different swath of birds, including the smallest woodpeckers in the world, these piculets. We saw grayish piculet, right, mentioned on our Western and Central Andes route. But this is a scaled piculet. As you can see, it's basically Eastern Andes and Northern Venezuela, etc. Another mott we'll look for is the whooping mott. Other birds include golden-fronted greenlet and the rosy thrush tanager, which is surprisingly more common in South America than it is in Southern Central America, like Costa Rica. And then day 4, we are going to be visiting Tayrona National Park, which is exceptionally beautiful. This Caribbean, just like kind of oasis. As you can imagine, we're at sea level, so it's humid and hot, but it's just dreamy and hosts a wide variety of birds in ecosystems that we haven't explored yet, like tropical lowland rainforest, coastal dunes, and beaches, with a little bit of dry forest in the back. So here's a little bit of a kind of tourist map of Tayrona National Park. And this is also the traditional homeland of the Kogis and the Arawaks and indigenous groups here from Colombia. But one of the biggest targets that we're going to be looking for here is the blue-billed curassow, which is like an arboreal turkey. And there's kind of 2 different populations for this bird, here along the coast and then here in the Eastern Andes. And there's only 1,100 observations globally for this critically endangered endemic species. And then continuing on in the lowlands, we'll keep our eyes peeled for lance-tailed manakins. And then after our day in Tayrona, we'll make our way over into the northeast into a different area called La Guajira, which is has its own gastrocultural vibe. It has its own kind of unique culture, and it has this completely different ecosystem, kind of acacia scrubland, thorn, kind of xeric ecosystem. I would imagine probably similar to some ecosystems found in Africa. And here there's about 300 species, and from first glance you'd think, oh, there's nothing out here, but it couldn't be any further from the truth. And like I said, there's tropical dry forest and a new ecosystem here for mangroves, coastal wetlands, and this xeric scrub. And xeric means very nutrient poor, extremely dry soil. And some of the bangers out here include the Orinocan saltator. This is a cousin to the mask saltator that we were talking about looking for in Manizales. And then the Tocuyo sparrow, which is a very rare regional endemic found in La Guajira and the dry forests of Venezuela. Tocuyo sparrow. And then the Buffy hummingbird, again, another East Andes kind of Los Llanos regional kind of specialty. And then pileated finch, pretty segmented populations here, abundant within its range, but not very abundant in Colombia. And then we'll continue on to Los Flamencos Reserve. And as one might presume, Los Flamencos are the flamingos. And so here there's about 340 species recorded. And again, similar type of ecosystem, coastal wetlands, mangroves, and tropical dry forest. And here we'll be looking for some really stunning birds, including a third piculate species called the chestnut piculate, with significantly lower abundance, 3,300 global observations. But the real star of the show, El Rey de la Guajira, the king of the Guajira. And for folks who didn't catch on, La Guajira is this area in Colombia. It's this, like I said, this xeric, dry, thorny scrubland that's unique from the rest of the country. And as such, we dive in there to see some unique birds like this vermilion cardinal, which was just a show-stopping bird. And then, like one could probably ascertain that Los Flamencos will be looking for large wading birds like the American flamingo and the scarlet ibis. And so basically that's the end of our short tour between Barranquilla and Riohacha. And there's a lot of birds to be seen here. And we drive to Riohacha, and that's where we wrap up. So that's all I have planned for y'all this evening. Thank you so much for your attention. Somehow I nailed the timing. We're exactly at an hour, and I guess I'll stop sharing my screen. And if folks have any questions, we can get into it.
Thanks very much, Benny. Much appreciated. A really interesting look at the world of birding in Colombia.
Thank you so much. Glad you
Or
enjoyed.
some of it.
Yeah, it's crazy. There's just like 2 routes of like 6 or 7 that like are like in the main kind of birding circuits.
Yeah, I was thinking that, that's like only 2, and your every word second word out of your mouth is endemic, endemic, endemic. I see there's a couple of questions.
Oh yeah.
What's the best season to go to Colombia? That's actually the only question so far.
So I don't think there's a best season. I think it's pretty good year round. I forget what the peak summer months are, but unlike Central America, there's not like this distinct like rainy and dry season. So South America is cool, but I'd say like June, July, August, and into like the first couple weeks of September are generally like the best time of year in terms of weather and precipitation. But again, right, like to go to Colombia, like are we talking about like the Choco lowlands? Are we talking about the Amazon? Are we talking about like the Caribbean North? And so each part of the country is going to experience climate in a different way. So like across the board, like I said, like June, July, August, and like into the beginning of like September is kind of when most tourism is happening. But it really just depends on what part of the country you're going to be visiting.
Are there any other questions?
Where was the chat feature?
It seems like not. But yeah,
Okay.
well done indeed.
Thanks. Thank you so much. I was just figuring out how to put something in the chat. Let's see. Oh, maybe because my sharing's still happening. There we go. There we go. Just put a little info for my stuff. Well, thank you guys all so much. I assume all the info. Yep, absolutely, David. All my tour prices are listed, including like single supplement and all that kind of stuff. And you can see the map and photos and a little bit more in depth on the day-to-day and things like that, and who my local partner is and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's all there, and I'm available. The beauty of traveling with somebody who's obviously fluent in Spanish and spends a lot of time in Latin America is strong relationships with local guides and partners. And I always go first to scout and build relationships to make sure that it's going to be a good fit and that they're safe and that they know a lot about birds and ecology. And that's the case for all my tours. You can expect a high level of proficiency and professionalism. And these folks who I work with have been doing this for years, and they work with birding clients, whether it's hardcore birders or just birders or photographers from all over the world. And so the tours are great for folks of any kind of birding level. And whether you've been birding many times in Latin America or your first time. It's myself and the local guide, and group size is cap at 10. So worst case scenario, the ratio between guide and participant is going to be 1 to 5. So you're going to get pretty individualized attention and plenty of time to learn about ecology and ask questions and to dive into deeper topics. And then I think G. Vahan was asking about a copy of this video. I think that's a great question for Derek.
Yeah, we'll have it on the YouTube channel in a few days. I don't know how many days because it depends on how busy I am with work. It takes about 2 hours to edit a video to get it ready to put on YouTube. So I need to carve out 2 hours sometime in the next week.
Well, thanks again, everybody. Miranda, thank you for the positive encouragement. Would love to have anybody and everybody. It's a good time. We have a lot of fun.
And I think that seems like a good point to wrap up. And thank everybody for joining. And if you're new to Learn the Birds, check us out again. We have interesting things happening next month, and every month for the rest of the year, for that matter. Take care, everyone. Thanks, Benny.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Bye-bye.
evening. Thanks, Derek. Bye.